Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the video you had no idea you were waiting for. This is the Angly serving tray video. And hey, you may not have magical powers in the shop, so you might have to dress those pieces of 1x6 yourself. If that's the case, they need to be 18 inches long and about they need to be 3/4 inches thick. Everything that you're seeing me do here, you should probably do the same. We're marking out where the handhold on the handle goes, and we're gonna deal with that later, but we need to mark it out right now. But where do I find the plans for this? Hey Jimmy, I'm glad you asked. I would check Google Classroom because there's probably a set of plans there. And on that set of plans, there's lots of measurements, so you can play along at home. Or in class, I mean. The marks at the end that you see there are 2 inches up, and that is indicating the overall width that you're going to end up with before the handle. To transition up from the width to the handle, I recommend you use these little discs. There's nothing particularly fancy about them other than they work nicely in our shop. Hey, here's a part you can screw up on. Marking the overall length. When you do this, you have to mark from the center out, and the overall length is 12. Be careful though, the overall length is measured at the 2-inch height, not the overall height of your piece as it is right now. So be mindful of that or you'll have a oopsie. I only have one tip for you here, and that is to make sure you stay on the waist side of your line. You're going to sand up to it later. Once you've cut past your line, you're done. So don't do that. Hey, I was going to edit this out, but I left it because I thought it was fun. The little piece that fell out from my relief cut there, it got stuck in the throat plate of the bandsaw. And when that happened, the piece wouldn't go any further. It was stuck. If something similar happens to you, please note the use of the piece of wood instead of my hand to clear the scrap. Next up is going to be the spindle sander, where we will actually sand up to your line. Of course, if you can't see your line, you need to draw it again because you need something to sand to. The spindle itself has, I think it's 3, maybe 3.5 inches. It should nicely fit the curves that you have drawn and cut out. When you get some sanding done, you always want to check it. So run your finger over it and feel for any humps and bumps and try and get rid of those. Now, you will find a hump and or bump at the end where it transitions to the straight part. And we're going to take care of that by hand later, so leave that. Speaking of which, here we are, and you're just going to get some 80 grit sandpaper, use a vise and a sanding block, and you can see we're just trying to smooth out the transition from the handle part down to the width. And when you're satisfied that it's as smooth as you like it, you're just going to trace it onto the next piece. Although that did seem fun at the time, I'm now considering how many of you are going to try it, and it's going to be noisy, so please don't. Once you have the second one cut out somehow, you're just going to have to mark the lengths the same as the first, and then we're moving on to the next piece, the sides. All you need to do with the sides is mark out their length, and unlike the handles, they're all one width, so you can mark directly at the edge. Now for the eagle-eyed viewers out there, you're right, you don't necessarily have to mark directly from the center, but just mark it so it's somewhat even on either end. What is important though, is that you mark out the way the angles are going to cut. When you get back to the miter saw, it's going to be a compound miter, there's bevels, there's miters. You're gonna just, man, it's bananas. So it's super handy if you mark those out as an indication for you to keep everything sorted when you get to the saw. Hold on, Saunders. You were just talking about cutting compound miters on a miter saw, and yet we're at the Dado saw. What is the story? In this case, I actually found it easier to run my Dado first before I cut the miters. And the reason I did that is this way there's a square end I can push with my push stick. If I cut the miters first, it's a gong show, it's all pokey and pointy, so I preferred this method. To set up this angled dado, mark a line a ½ inch up which represents the top of where your bottom panel is going to go. As for the depth, which I'm setting here, draw a line about 1/4 inch up. It doesn't have to be precise, but you should be around 1/4 inch to 3/8. If you take out too much, it's going to cause a weak spot, and we don't want that. Please note, this is not my first rodeo, so I didn't use a scrap piece. I set it up the first time correctly. However, you may want to do that. Use a scrap piece, use your buddy's piece, whatever you want, but don't try and use yours right off the bat, because if your setup is incorrect, well then you're going to mess up all that hard work that you've done. Also, take note that the first piece that I ran a dado in was just the side without the handle. That way, if there was a bit of a oopsie, it's not that big a deal to get back to where you were before you screwed up, if that happens. The first thing to do at the miter saw is to enable the fine miter adjustment, and you do that by flipping up that switch on the left, and that can only be done when you press down the button. And now trim one end where it's marked with your hands not that close to the blade, please. With one end of all 4 pieces trimmed, it's the tricky part. You gotta cut everything to length. And it's gonna be very important that both sides and both ends match one another. And the way we're gonna do that is with a stop block. To set that up, make a couple small cuts until you're exactly where you want it. Now, in my case, I had to move that wing over a little bit to catch the stop block. Once you're all adjusted, just slide your stop block right up until it touches your workpiece, clamp it in place, and you're good to go. Double check that the setting is all good before you fully cut it through. And once you're confirmed, you can go ahead and cut both of those same pieces. Of course, to cut the handles to length, start the same process over again. Take a few light cuts until you get the length you want. Adjust the stop block accordingly and have at it. Well, we've cut 4 pieces of wood to length. That seemed to take a while. Anyways, now that we're here, let's tape them together and see how they fit. The main reason we're doing this is to double check that our compound miters have worked out. If when you put it together, there's a lot of wobble and wiggle to your tray, that means the miters aren't correct. On the other hand, if it won't actually close up, it's another indication that they're not correct. Let's see what happens. Well, that's not good.
Stupid product. Ridiculous. I'm going home.
Will he give up? Stay tuned for part 2 to find out.